Antonio Felix da Costa has done it. We have a brand new Formula E champion. Jean-Eric Vergne led home a DS Techeetah 1-2 in Berlin today, and we have a packed show this evening with lots to discuss. This is the Inside Electric podcast, and I am your host, Katie Fairman. After a stunning run of form since Formula E returned to action in Berlin, Antonio Felix da Costa followed teammate Jean-Eric Vergne home in a 1-2 finish today to clinch both the driver's title for himself and a second consecutive title for his DS Techeetah team. With me to chat through all of the day's action and the reaction to da Costa's championship win are Inside Electric co-founders Hazel Southwell and Peter Leung, and we are also very pleased to be joined by a very special guest. Naomi Panter has worked in Formula E since season 1 with specialist Formula E publication Current E, and then in PR roles with the likes of Mahindra, Jaguar and Techeetah. Welcome to the podcast, Naomi.
Thanks very much for having me.
No worries. If you are a first-time listener, we are an independent podcast covering Formula E and electric motorsport. You can find us on the socials at Inside Electric or online at inside-electric.com. Now, we have a lot to cover in this episode, but we're going to be talking about the reaction to Antonio Felix da Costa and DS Techeetah's title wins. We'll look at some of the main talking points from race 4 in Berlin, and we'll also be taking a look ahead at what's in stake for the final 2 races next week. Right, let's dive straight into it and talk about our new Formula E champion. It's something I think most of us saw coming, but Hazel, how are you feeling with Antonio Felix da Costa taking that championship today?
I don't think a lot of people would have pegged Antonio at the start of this season, if you can imagine that far back, in the before times. Although Antonio has been very competitive in Formula E when he's had the chance. He won a race in season 1 and then didn't again until season 5. But he's always, because he's often not had machinery in which he could possibly show what he could do. I think his ability and his commitment to the series has really sort of looked a bit wishy-washy. Just because, he had the worst car on the grid for 2 years in a row through no fault of his own, and sort of remained loyal to that team and remained loyal to the manufacturer who was keeping him in the series. But because he so rarely was able to be competitive, people simply stopped thinking of him as a front runner or as one of those competitive people. Same as Jerome D'Ambrosio when he was languishing at Dragon, whereas we know actually if he's got the stuff, he can do a lot more. So I think, people kind of assumed that Antonio was going to be bullied by Jev. There's this sort of perception that Jev rules Techeetah, and that he'd kind of held Lotterer back, and that he'd do the same thing to Antonio, and that Antonio was making a horrible mistake, especially when he was beaten repeatedly by his old car in the BMWs. And that, whilst they were looking like a really strong team, I think a lot of people would have said well, da Costa is making the best of it whilst Jev is having a relatively torrid season, but he's made a terrible error, and he very clearly has not. The DS Techeetahs look ridiculously strong. All that time he spent in the midfield, we've said this before during this podcast, and he said it himself. And midfield is a generous way to describe Andretti for most of the time in Formula E. All of that time spent having to grab any chance he got has turned him into a real machine when he has the equipment to be able to demonstrate that. And I think it's really heartwarming seeing somebody who had to find themselves. He's the first champion who hasn't been an F1 driver. He's the first champion who came to Formula E from junior series without kind of a diverted career in WEC or Brazilian stock cars and NASCAR and all over the place for the first one. And he's a driver who absolutely has found his feet in Formula E and has grown up as a sort of professional race driver in Formula E over the course of all of the seasons. He's not one of the drivers who's done every race, because for a while he was double dropping with DTM for the first 2 seasons, but he's done pretty much all of them. He's been in every season, and I think we love a good narrative in Formula E. And the narratives, unlike F1, don't have to be about like the intensity of a current situation. They don't have to be about rivalries, because the series is still so young. You're writing its history. You're writing about the way that people develop in it and the kind of stories that you can tell with Formula E. And Antonio's is a really good one. So obviously, as a journalist, I'm absolutely delighted.
Yeah, like you say, he's one of the older guys, not so much in age on the grid, but somebody that's been there since Formula E was sort of born. Peter, after he took the championship today, understandably, he was very overcome with emotion. And as a result, I think quite a lot of us, and even Jack Nicholls in the commentary box said, it almost choked him up a little bit. But you could tell from the way that he spoke after the race, how much this meant to him and how close he was almost to quitting motorsport, and the importance of, if you have that dream, to not give up.
Yeah, there was he showed so much gratitude for all of the success that he has achieved, and also all the hard knocks that he has received. He was he made sure to in the post race thank Red Bull and also BMW for sort of molding him into the professional racing driver that he is today. There was a one point in his career where he was considering quitting. This was like 2012, and he wasn't really sure what he was doing, and I think that was around the time when Red Bull came knocking. So it was really, really nice to see that nice guys do finish first. So there was just you could really, and the thing about Antonio is that he really is a very, very likable guy. He's very friendly. He's very charming. He's very chatty. I think we've all interviewed him. He talks quite a bit, and he's very, very open about himself. And with his time in Formula E, it's just kind of transformed him into this person where he can sort of really be himself and also do the thing that he loves the most, which is going racing. So it's very, very fulfilling, and it's almost wistful to see his career sort of come full circle, and to be able to achieve the success that he has now is very, very fulfilling and rewarding to see.
Yeah. And Naomi, Antonio Felix da Costa must be somebody that you've come across so many times working in Formula E. Did you ever expect a championship to come his way, or was it always Antonio was sort of the one that would never quite make it? He was always unlucky with the opportunities he got, and he said it himself, he was normally in the wrong place at the right time, kind of thing. Is this something that you expected of Antonio?
I think I was beginning to give up hope. I think beginning to is probably actually even an exaggeration. I think I had given up hope. Looking back even to the first series, seeing him standing there in the pit lane with his Red Bull helmet on, and I was thinking, this guy is, I knew him from junior Formula. I was like, this guy's going to absolutely storm it. He's in a team that's led by someone from Formula One. They look good. They got a big sponsor. It's going to be easy. And it just didn't happen. And he did convert it sometimes into wins, but he had, I think, disqualifications even in that first year, and just a difficult time. And I think you really expected him to do it with the works team, really. If I compare BMW to Techeetah, I know it sort of is a works team, but with the BMW outfit, you think this might be it. And for some reason, it just didn't click. And so I agree with Hazel when he went to Techeetah. Everyone thought, what are you doing? You're going into Jev's back garden, basically. Just like you're never going to get preferential treatment. You're never going to get the opportunities. But he's just absolutely stormed it, and just with a level of calm that I don't think I've ever seen before. I think there's something lovely about approaching the end of the season, and a driver becomes this otherworldly figure who is just so at one with their car, and they're just starting to go off into the distance. And I think we saw that from Jev, and we've seen that from previous champions as well. It's so lovely that Antonio's put himself in that position and allowed himself to just drive. And I'm astounded he's done it with such a margin. I mean, it is an almost comical margin. And I think maybe a lot of that due to the circumstances of how this last round this last event has worked, but just amazing. I mean, you know, I would talk with a lot of friends during the pandemic about what Formula E was going to look like when it returns, even would it return? And, you know, Antonio leading, and what would you do if you called it now and gave Antonio the trophy? Would he be happy? And I really don't think he would have been. I think he had to go and prove himself and earn it. And I think he's done that so definitively. And he will be looked at as one of the real champions. So I'm absolutely delighted for him. He's such a nice guy. He's great.
I've just realised he earned, so a while back on this podcast, we ended up during the lockdown, or the shutdown for Formula E, we talked a lot about what needed to happen for the championship to end, and it was that 2 more events needed to take place. So whether they were double headers or single races, that it had to be 2 separate events. Antonio has won the championship on the second race of the second double header. So this is exactly where the championship, this is the earliest the championship could have ended.
Yeah, very valid point. Well, we still have 2 more races to go, but in theory, Antonio is the first driver to ever have won the championship this early in the season. Inevitably, there's always going to be conversation regarding somebody who wins Formula E championship and whether they're going to stick with Formula E or whether they're going to go somewhere else, such as Formula One. We've seen it with Jean-Eric Vergne. He got an F1 opportunity, but he decided to stick with Formula E. Hazel, you asked Antonio a question in the virtual press conference after the race about the possibility of going to F1 if the opportunity arose. Could you elaborate a little more on what his answer was?
So I think Jev's response to his F1 offer was quite a lot more robust than deciding not to take it up. I think he's too French to use exactly this phrase, but I believe like shoving up and the arses would have definitely featured. But yeah, it's something. Like people are always fascinated by this. The Formula E champion, for some reason, is automatically eligible for a super license, which is slightly odd because they're not comparative championship, or it's not a feeder championship. But the Formula, normally, if you were eligible for a super license, you need to amass the relevant number of points in the last 3 years via the eligibility system. Which is various kind of championships can give you points. It's not only feeder series. And then you would need to do 300 kilometers of testing in a representative F1 car, which can be like a 2014 car, but just something relatively recent. But the Formula E champion doesn't have to. Now, supposing that you are an energy drink manufacturer who seems to have a bit of a driver lineup issue at the moment and not a lot in the pipeline in terms of people who are eligible for super licenses, then you might be tempted to offer the Formula E champion a drive. And I think even 2 years ago, Antonio would have grabbed it with both hands. I do not think for 1 second at the end of season 4, when he was miserable in terms of he knew there were good times coming and he was desperately trying to keep the faith in terms of the Andretti BMW project, but he'd spent the latter half of the season being lapped by the people he's just beaten and that he's just stood on a podium with, and he said that today on the podium. And like, to go through those times, I mean, if you're offered a way out, you'd take it. Whereas now, he said he wouldn't. He's happy. He doesn't think, he said trying to get those contracts in F1, that's for the young guys. Like, that, not that Antonio is old. But yeah, he said, this is a series in which I'm happy, I'm comfortable. We all want to murder each other on the track. But then everyone goes out and parties, and it's a family, and it's somewhere where he's really happy driving, and he's really happy with the competitive level, and he knows that he's got a unique understanding of the craft, and he can take a championship. Whereas to be maybe fighting for a couple of midfield points and then getting a name dragged for not performing in F1. It's not much of an offer, is it?
No, exactly. Naomi, are you in agreement with the comments Da Costa made?
100%. I'm delighted he made those comments. I think I almost feel, because I'm slightly protective of this championship, as I think we all are, I slightly feel insulted that it's like, oh, you get a promotion to F1, whereas I don't think it necessarily is that anymore. I think it's a sideways step, or I mean, pick a direction. But I think it's not the promotion that it may once have been. And I think Hazel's right that it's just an opportunity to be dragged through the mud again if you go back. And I think realistically, the person I think about all the time in this kind of note is Albon and where he is now. Yeah. And obviously, there was so much discussion in preseason testing. I mean, God, it feels like another time completely. But I think the beginning of season 5, maybe I'm right, when he went and everyone was like, "Oh my God, this has all changed. What is it the right move?" And it kind of has been in the short term, but will it be in the long term? And it'll be really interesting to look at that and see if that Red Bull seat is successful for him and if it ultimately leads to a longer career. And I think Antonio's been pretty much at the coalface of that, and he's seen, whether or not he wants to be there. And he came into Formula E as they were sort of two polar opposites in Formula E, of the drivers on the way out and the young hotshots that bounce their head off the Formula 1 ceiling and bounce into Formula E. And he's stayed there long enough and learned his craft, that I think, and the championship has grown with him, that now to win a Formula E race is considered really, really difficult. And something to be very proud of. And I think if he can be doing that in the style he's been doing recently, I think that has the kudos that potentially going back into Formula 1 and sitting in the middle of the field would have, if not more, in my opinion.
Yeah. We had a quite harsh discussion on Discord a couple of days ago, where we were thinking about where one team that has quite a changeable lineup and perhaps the drivers don't always seem that happy, but it is an opportunity to be in Formula E. Which ex-F1 drivers or which F1 drivers currently would be likely to potentially be binned off and thus arrive there next season? Mean discussion, but sometimes you have them. And we said it would be pretty rough if Albon's gamble from the Nissan factory team took him to F1 through the ringer and then back to what is not a good Formula E team.
Yeah, I think
as a bleak trajectory.
Absolutely. And what I also like about Formula E is there's absolutely no guarantee that a race-winning Formula 1 driver will necessarily be any good in Formula E. And it's the same with a Le Mans winner, and I really like that it sort of throws up. I mean, there are some unbelievable drivers, I say, languishing at the back. I mean, no one's languishing anymore. There's 24 amazing drivers there now, but they're really struggling. So I think, that's why I think the likes of Antonio is right to stay where he is, because he sort of has that, whatever that fairy dust is, that a lot of drivers just don't have.
Yeah, I mean, we discussed before, obviously, Da Costa's teammate is Jean-Eric Vergne. He actually took the win today, something we haven't yet discussed, the actual race result. We're talking about Da Costa. But yeah, Jean-Eric Vergne took the win. He also started on pole position. Da Costa finished in second, reflecting the same position that he started. And Sébastien Buemi managed to get up onto that podium spot from fourth. In fact, the top 5 really were very close, battling for the first place for sort of the second half of the race. Peter, that was some incredible action. I think they were almost 2 seconds within each other, top 5 at some points in that race.
Yeah, it was, and I think the top 5 cars were kind of forming a train. It was like the Vergne train. It was Vergne, Da Costa, and then it was, I think, Buemi, Roland, and then De Vries. So it was just really, really fun to see all of them kind of really, really battling it out. And we were just watching their sort of remaining usable energy, and it was very, very close in between. So that was definitely some nail biting stuff. And of course, the threat of rain and thunderstorms also added some spice to the action. Shall we say some much needed spice, because it's just been boiling hot for the past few races. Still boiling hot, but at least we got some a little bit of a wrench in the works, especially during the race, when I was watching the whole thing. It was just so it felt really chaotic. Like this race felt really, really chaotic at the beginning, and then at the end it kind of sort of settled down, and then you started to see the not team orders sort of play out between the Techeetah cars and also the Nissan Edams cars. So definitely a memorable race, as is typical of Formula E.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about the close racing between Verne and Da Costa that we saw. We didn't see any sort of tension on or off the track, but there was the swap and attack radio message given in order to let Verne through. Guys, what did you think of that? Did you think that was a fair call to make, or would you have liked to see them race?
I think that was perfect tactics. That was how to protect your teammate for attack mode. Because to swap and let the other guy take attack mode whilst you're defending him from Whamey, or Roland actually at the time, like that it was 100% the right call, and any team leading should have done that. It wasn't a case of stopping them fighting. It was a case of securing the attack modes without losing places, when they knew that there were cars so close behind them. So tactically, that was like the equivalent of a pit call, you know.
Yeah, guys, you all.
And also they had the teams championship to consider. So
Yeah.
it was all about, you know, team first and then sort it out between the two drivers.
I think Jeff had been struggling with his regen in previous races and not necessarily having a great second half to most races. So it kind of makes sense to wrap him up in a strategy that gives him a certain amount of guaranteed success. And also helps, as you say, Peter, to tie up the team's championship.
I think his regen pedal was definitely working, because when I saw the sort of remaining usable energy and the regen and the remaining was pretty much identical to Antonio. So the team definitely went through the finer points and rectified that situation.
Yeah, well, let's chat a little bit more about the team's championship, which Techeetah.
Techeetah!
Oh, it's the curse of the host. If you're hosting, you can't say that.
Just say DS.
It's something about this time in the evening, maybe. But yes, they wrapped up their second consecutive team's title. And Mark Preston, who is the team principal there, he has just done a phenomenal job running that team. Naomi, are you in agreement with that? I mean, they've just done such a brilliant job with it.
Absolutely. They've got an incredible team all the way through. You know, the people working at every level are really expert in what they do. And it's been, you know, changed over the years, but is now in a really good place. I think so much credit has to go to Mark. And I think often maybe even that credit isn't given to him because there's so many people around him. But I think he's done an amazing job to go from effectively the back of the field to the front of the field and doing whatever he needed to do to create a team that is also stable, with maybe not so stable funding early on, and then incredibly an unstable driver, taking a punt on one of the most unstable drivers. And I think, you know, and every time you introduce a second driver, you're always potentially upsetting the apple cart, you know, and he's managed all of that. I think it's also really lovely, not to keep going back to Da Costa, but it is lovely that Da Costa has his victory with Mark Preston. You know, I just think it's lovely. It's a bit of a homecoming. We all love redemption stories. You were talking about Jeb's story recently, and I think Antonio, like you said early on, has the same. So, and I think in many ways it highlights Mark's redemption story. He's been through a lot that I don't think he talks about in all of these years of Formula E to build that team. So I think it's well worth highlighting all that he's done. Yeah.
Peter, are you in agreement with that?
Yeah, I just think about, you know, when Techeetah won the season 4 championship, and we had a really, really long chat, and we just talked about the Super Aguri days and all the trials and tribulations of that, and just to finally see it come good for him back then, and then the year after, and now the year after that, is just, it's very, very fulfilling. And at the time, I still think in season 4, when Verne won the championship, they did it. They were a Renault customer team, and they did it on a shoestring budget, which was about a third of what Renault had, and they just blitzed it. It was really, really, it was so impressive. And then to have DS come on board and finally give them the resources and the and sort of the technological know-how to actually turn themselves into a powerhouse team that they knew that they could be, was, again, really, really rewarding to see.
And they've struggled from in so many different ways. And even if you take even how the garage looks as an example, it's quite a good illustration of how the team is doing, I think, sometimes. And they've gone from big sponsor season 1, losing that, going to court, all of that being a mess. Then their team Aguri, with golf. So half the team is wearing red and blue, and the other half is wearing whatever new t-shirt they can make that quickly. Then you had Techeetah launch with that. Remember that Grid Girl photo shoot? For the launch of Techeetah, and everyone was like,
I'd like to forget that, yeah.
And it felt like something from like a million years ago. And you remember all of that, and now you look at that team, and it looks like, I hate to make the comparison, it looks like the equivalent of Mercedes in Formula One. It is so on point. You look at everything, even their Nespresso machine was so perfectly placed in the garage today. It's just all mint. It looks absolutely amazing. And I think, it feels now that Techeetah has their brand down, their team down, their staff down, and I think hopefully their driver pairing down, because it would be lovely to see them compete for the next few years, even batting championship potential, opportunities back and forth. I think that's really exciting, I think.
In a way, I almost feel like I kind of wish DS and Techeetah weren't so good, because Formula E really prides itself on being like close racing, always down to the last race. So to have this sort of powerhouse runaway team that is just so dominant in everything that they're doing, it's almost like, oh, we don't want the races to be predictable. Like, are we going to get sick and tired of DS winning at the top?
Peter, like, think back to Riyadh.
Yeah.
They didn't score any points at all in the first race.
That's very true. Yeah, that's true.
In the second race, they looked like they had absolutely lost it.
Yeah,
they looked nothing like the team that had been this organised machine. Whereas other teams were stepping up quite clearly.
Yeah, BMW were definitely.
Teams get a good run, they get momentum, but especially because the championship is overall quite short and the races are quite far apart. And every race is so different.
Yeah.
You see teams build that momentum. So, and we sort of touched on this earlier, definitely this is such an extraordinary way to run Formula E. We've never had races this close together. I mean, no championship runs races. Oh, hello, Poppy.
Hey, there she is.
Hello, baby. It's okay. It's okay.
This is definitely going on the YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, it was, in the early beginnings, it was not looking as promising for Techeetah as it was back in season 5. And we all thought like, oh, BMW, double two winners on are they going to walk this? And
or Jaguar looked so strong on their day. There was a lot. Mercedes looked really like the HWA gamble the previous year had paid off, and they did have the experience to be able to put that into something. At the start of the season, we were kind of like, maybe Porsche haven't done something. I mean, I realised that we're coming on to the Porsche section later.
Hey, Hazel's favourite section, I might add.
But yeah, like the narratives at the start of this year were there giant killers coming into Formula E? Would it, because a lot of people, we're all inside Formula E. We all like follow it a lot, but a lot of people just assumed that Mercedes turning up, that was like game over.
Yeah.
Especially when they got a podium in their first ever race.
Yeah.
As a fact, that people were writing off everybody else. They were just like, right, that's it. It's going to go like Formula One. Goodbye. And actually, what we've seen is pretty messy. Even if you look at what's happened in the last few races, they've had massive operational problems, and they've had penalties and weird stuff. And like, it's not because they're idiots. It's because Formula E is really difficult.
It is, yeah.
And
indeed.
Yeah, Techeetah have achieved this dominance by repeatedly going through and finding. It's the skill of anything in motorsport, like with the car, you go through the car and you find out what bit is not working or what bit can be optimized. And Techeetah do the same thing with the team, and they do it in a very effective way. And I think, what Naomi said about Mark is very relevant to that. It's not like they boot people for no reason. but they sort of look at where are we lacking something, and we'll get someone in to do it, in a way that sometimes other teams don't necessarily seem as able to be able to analyse, like, this is what we need, and to come back from something like that disastrous first weekend, which would just look terrible, and to go away for that big break, that 6-week break between races, and come back in Santiago and be like, okay, this isn't great, but like, well, actually it was, Antonio had a really good race. Jev didn't so much, but certainly they were much, much more competitive than they had looked like it was remotely possible for them to be in Riyadh, because they'd spent that time optimizing the setup of themselves, and because they have, Jev, who, because of who he is as a person, has to do that work on himself every time he has a setback. I think that's sort of built into the team as a form of analysis, quite like Honda operate, like in terms of like the philosophy as a company, but with a lot more French. Well, I don't know. I suppose they have Pierre Gasly. Maybe an equal amount of French swearing. Anyway,
it definitely dovetails with what Antonio said, and I'm sorry to bring this back to Antonio, but he is champion now. So like right after what
I think he deserves attention.
Definitely,
we'll talk
yes,
about him, like,
he definitely deserves to be lavish with attention. But it dovetails really nicely with what he said after the race, which was that, when he went to Techeetah and moved from BMW, he thought he was a hard worker, and then he joined Techeetah, and it's like they just work so hard, and it was that sort of work ethic that sort of convinced him that, oh, okay, so these guys work really, really hard, and they're really good at what they do. So this is my chance to do this myself and actually go and win some races, and to that end, it came good for him.
Yeah,
and so much of the success, I think, in teams that have been successful over the past is not in the money they're putting in necessarily. Maybe some of the engineers and the teams would disagree with me, but it's so much about the environment you put around the driver. And you've got a myriad of works teams all putting huge amount of money in, huge marketing spend, everything, and picking a driver who can win races in their car and giving them all the tools to do it. But if they haven't got the environment around them to feel supported and to drive how they want to drive, or to help them drive how they are confident driving, it just doesn't turn into anything. And if you're one of those works teams and you have an amazing car, but you're at the back, you're never going to really go forward. But you're also next to another works team who's also having a bad weekend, and they can hit into you just as easily as you can hit into them. And it's one of the best things about Formula E. You have to find that consistency, and like I was saying at the beginning, that certain air of smoothness and confidence, and that just sends you to the front. So again, it's just one of those things I love about the championship. There's no guarantee of success just by spending money.
Yeah, totally. It's just the same as, you said you could be a driver who comes in from F1 or WEC, and you could be a champion there, or multiple race winner, and you can get yourself plopped in Formula E. Doesn't mean you're going to start winning races. And the same goes with if you're a team, a manufacturer, and you've got all this money and you can throw all the money you want at Formula E. But at the end of the day, if you don't have that atmosphere and that community built around the team, you're not going to be winning races. But let's jump on to who had a good day today. Obviously, it goes without saying, and probably quite understated, that it was a great day for Techeetah. Vern took his first win of the season. And with Da Costa, they completed their 1-2. But we've already had quite a lot of chat about Techeetah, and I am saying it right. I'm going to jinx it now, but it's doing okay so far. But let's have a chat about Nissan, who converted a strong qualifying to P3 and P5 in the race. There was some confusion as to whether Roland, who was running in third for a lot of the race, was to let Buemi through, and then Buemi sort of took the corner too wide, and it sort of just ruined their race, sort of disintegrated from there. Naomi, how did you think Nissan's race went today? Do you think if they had kept Roland in that third position, he could have possibly fought Antonio for second, or possibly even gone on to take a win today?
I think possibly. I think third and fourth is probably the best that they probably would have hoped for at the beginning of the weekend. I mean, maybe they could have pushed, but I worry that it would have been a bit of a torpedo down the inside of one of the last corners to actually achieve that, to be honest. But I think I struggle to pick apart what... Pardon?
Nick de Vries style.
Yeah, exactly,
Hey.
exactly. He was one of my drivers of the day, by the way. But I think that from what I can gather, it was just a real cock up in when they did the change and how they let Buemi by, and it just completely compromised the whole thing. So the idea is strong, but I just think they messed it up. I mean, I'm sort of biased in that I do rate Roland and really enjoy watching him race, and I think I'm one of those people who would love to see him have a measure of consistent success in Formula E, just to really solidify his space there, because I think he could be, or is, a really good Formula E driver. So I think they'll be disappointed, but for me I think it's quite nice to see a bit of consistency, 2x2, and the two of them can be running up there, because a lot of the teams are completely at opposite ends of the track. So I think they should be happy, really.
Yeah. Hazel, do you think Nissan had a good day today?
I think they did. So, what was it? Yesterday, Buemi said that Techeetah were running in Formula E.5.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone else was running in Formula E.5 because Techeetah are so far ahead. And then in the group stages, you saw Jev put in a phenomenal time, and Oliver Rowland dead equal it. Like, that is the closest any team has got to when Techeetah are putting in the top times. Like, that is the closest any other team has got. I mean, you can't get any closer than that. They were joint top of the group stages, and it didn't quite convert because Jev did classic Jev stuff and was like, I see you've set a phenomenal time. Let me take 2/10 out of it. in a very much, Jev to Formula E qualifying is very much what Hamilton is to Formula One qualifying when he's on one. I think the sheer pace, the fact they did harass the Techeetahs all race, and it was a weird race. It was wet, the surface was a bit weird, it was very dark, it was relatively cold. But I think they had the pace not only in qualifying, but they were on them all race. That is reeling it back in, and it does also show how close it can be in Formula E, and that you can put it back together.
Yeah. Well, somebody who had a good race today, finished 4 and passed Roland on the final lap, was Nick de Vries. Naomi, you've already said that he's one of your drivers of the day, but he did a really stellar job of keeping up with the guys in the front. Why is he your driver of the day, or one of your drivers of the day?
I think, I don't know whether or not he deserves it or not, but in my opinion, I just love to see a driver there who has nothing necessarily to prove except their own talent. They don't have to necessarily bring home points, or, well, they do, but they don't really have anything to prove in the championship standings really at this stage. And any successful race can jump you up the table massively. So I think it was just nice to have a bit of a firecracker in the mix when everyone else is being so tentative and trying to bring home really good points. But it was impressive to stay with that pack. We can see in Formula E how spread out things can get. The fact that there were 5 of them crossing the line within a second of each other, or whatever it was, is really great. And it proves at least that Techeetah aren't entirely running away with it on pace overall. But I've just been impressed with him overall. I mean, he came in with, we know his history. He's a great driver. He can do it in different championships. He's great in lots of different formats. And it's been nice to see him do well in a team that was pipped to do well. But really, he's against a teammate who hasn't been that consistent at all. He's been the one kind of plugging in decent enough results. And I think, that's a pretty good showing, I think, for next season, in my opinion. If the car is good enough and they can get that consistency, I think he could be one of the front runners.
Yeah, well, exciting times. Looking forward to next season already. But Peter, de Vries was given some warnings earlier in the race for his aggressive defence. Did you catch much of that from when you were doing the live comms?
I did. Yeah, he was given a black and white flag for his aggressive driving. I just kind of chalked that up to sort of the rookie aggression, and just trying to test out, what he can do and what he cannot do. Just kind of pushing, race controls buttons as a young driver.
Race in a row, he's been warned.
Yeah.
He got a reprimand yesterday.
He did, yeah.
Remember,
and
that
also the car pushing thing from yesterday. So that was he was de Vries doing his best Nigel Mansell impression, which he got a heck of a bollocking for from race control. He just did so many things, and he just felt like he just felt he just felt he was done wrong by that. So
I think that one's explicable to the team, but he now has a problem, which is that he has not performed to the same degree as Van Dorn. And overall, and he also has not. He's been quite unlucky with DNFs. But there is an element to which, like, De Vries needs to make this work. He needs some high point scoring finishes. And yeah, he is being aggressive. He probably needs to watch himself on that. He's had a couple of reprimands.
He's got a couple driver penalty points as well.
Yeah, he does. I mean, like, to be honest, nobody's on very many in Formula E. Like, I had a look at this earlier, and the driver with the most is on like 5 or something. And so. Which sounds like quite a lot, but it's 12 for a race ban or whatever it is. And you'll be dropped and sent back to Dragon before that happens. But I think De Vries has had quite a few penalties. Overall, they show that operational greenness of the Mercedes team. But aggression on track, he does need to be careful with that, because it's a fine line between, we discussed yesterday, Max Günther has kind of reversed a reputation that he had for being a bit of a dirty driver. And, Nick de Vries does not want to carry that reputation.
No.
And once you're on the radar with the race control, you are all the more likely to be reprimanded in the future. You can get extra nervous, maybe not drive on instinct anymore, and it can just compound bad luck through a weekend. So it's a dodgy place to be, even in terms of your own mindset, I think. Especially
because drivers start showing you absolutely no quarter, because they just assume you're going to cut them up. So like it makes it very difficult in Formula E, where there is so much close contact. And you see it with drivers who get that reputation that once you're involved in incidents, you're involved in more incidents because people will just shut the door on you.
Yeah. Well, somebody who had a decent race today is Lucas Di Grassi, who climbed from P11 to P6. But post-race, he was rather unhappy again. And this time it was with the qualifying groups and the disadvantage that he feels he is at. Listening to the post-race press conference, somebody made the mistake of asking Lucas about this, and he gave a 10-minute answer when we were trying to wrap things up. But that's just Lucas Di Grassi, isn't it? Peter, do you think that his moaning, his complaining is founded, or do you think he needs to just sort of deal with it?
I saw him. Was it Di Grassi fighting with Mitch Evans, and also with was it Rene Rast? It was just throughout the race, and it was Rast
let him by.
Yeah, it was kind of a return.
Lotterer.
Oh, as well, Lotterer. Okay, so it's kind of a return to form for Lucas to complain about group qualifying, because he always, he that's just something that he always says, and it's kind of been sort of a running joke with him. In fact, we have that on our Inside Electric bingo card. But it's just Audi have not been doing as well as they should be, and I don't exactly know what it is about Audi right now. It's just they're not getting the results that we know that they can get, and with also Rene Rast coming in after Daniel Abt sacking, it's very, very hard to get up to speed with a new teammate, and you can't really share the sort of information that you have, because you have to. Rene is completely not in his element when it comes to Formula E, at least not yet. So it's just been kind of a learning thing, and with Di Grassi, it is very, very, very strange to see him. So it's kind of reverting back to the usual, what you would call drivers' excuses, I think, with complaining about qualifying groups.
Yeah, well, we've got a lot more to still get through, so I will dash through, much to Hazel's pleasure, I'm sure. The others that had a good day. It was another strong day for Lotterer, Hazel's favourite driver on the grid.
I can do 30 seconds about Andre Lotterer if you like.
Sure, why not? Why don't you tell us how he climbed from P17 to P8? Hazel, go.
So P17 to P8 is an undeniably impressive rise. We know that, it's not actually that easy to make that kind of advance in Formula E, especially in a car that isn't desperately efficient, which we know the Porsche isn't. It was cooler today, which was probably a good advantage for the Porsche. Thermal management issues all over that have shown up previously. And Lotterer is obviously able to use his Formula E experience to negotiate through a pack where it's not that there was a lot of incidents, but there definitely was a lot of thickness of traffic. There was a lot of trains or mini trains within the pack. And he, I think at these Tempelhof races, he has been showing a racecraft within Formula E that he hasn't always, partly because he had a front-running car when he was at Techeetah, and so would often be in the front in the first place, and also that he's been showing a maturity of management and racecraft. And it sounds stupid to credit Andre Lotterer, the oldest driver on the grid, I think.
Massa is the oldest. Yeah.
They're the same age, so one of the oldest drivers on the grid with maturity. But one of the problems with the way that he's driven in Formula E has been immaturity in the series. Like if you think about when he ploughed through Sam Bird's car in Paris a couple of years ago, and Bird was absolutely livid, and he was absolutely right to be. And there have been a few incidents like that with Lotterer, and he has been involved in incidents. And I think what you're seeing now is a very developed, very considered, very able to take advantage of opportunities driver that probably actually, if he had driven like this in the Techeetah, he would have been much closer to Bern.
Yeah, well, that was certainly more than 30 seconds, Hazel. Do you need to lie down? Talking that nicely about Lotterer for that long must have taken it out of you. But yeah, so Massa, who we spoke a little bit about then, he made it into Super Pole but slid back to P10, but still a decent result for the Venturi team, and possibly some small signs of recovery from Jaguar, with Evans finishing P7. But let's just have a chat about Evans' teammates, James Collado. There's been rumours this week that this could have been James Collado's last race. Nothing has been confirmed by the team, but they did announce before we headed to Berlin that Tom Blomqvist was being brought on as sort of a test development, a reserve driver role. And it seems possible from his attitude in the post-race press conferences that was it. That was his last race. Naomi, will you be sad to see James Collado go? Because he hasn't really had an opportunity to sort of show off his talents.
Yeah, he's a victim of just the nature of Formula E, really, that a bad luck is compounded by further bad luck, and sometimes you just can't get out of it. And even he has had, even in Berlin, pretty good performances up until he's either, he's been smashed into or whatever. I've always rated Collado really highly. I mean, even since his sort of days testing Force India in 2013 or something like that, I always rated him as a driver. I enjoyed watching him in Ferraris as well. So I'm really kind of gutted. He does feel like quite a good fit for the Jaguar team, but has been. I mean, I think he has had better results than Mitch in the beginning of the season. I think, if I'm right, or some at least very good performances. But yeah, he just doesn't have that consistency, which is a real shame. In a really great team that he could really stay with a long time. We've seen how Mitch has just been completely embraced by Jaguar and is given all of the tools necessary because he's pretty consistent, but is also capable of the win if he needs to, or if he's in the right position. So yeah, I'll be sad. I would love to see him get another chance, but I just think Formula E isn't really that environment anymore. You don't really have that. There's not really that opportunity for a front running team.
No, exactly. And with Bird going to Jaguar next year, he's obviously not going to be rejoining with that team. So I hope it's not the end of Collado's time in Formula E, but unfortunately, I think it could well be. Well, we've got to rush through who had a bad day today because we've spent so long talking about Da Costa because it's been such an exciting race and so much has happened. But worth mentioning about Max Günther, obviously yesterday's race winner, he had a nightmare of a day. He went from hit to shit, as one of our previous podcast guests, as Fadian would say.
Reverse.
Yes, he made a clumsy smash into Turvey on lap 1 and gets a grid penalty for the next race for causing a collision. Should be noted as well, he didn't make an appearance in the post-race press conference, which is meant to be mandatory, otherwise you get a big old fine. So whether he decided that he's going to take the fine or whether he was ruled out of that on medical grounds, we're not sure. Bird could only recover from P12 to P12, and his teammate Robin Fries didn't actually start the race. Mahindra had issues again. Lind hung on to finish 4th, but D'Ambrosio slid to P15. And Van Doorn had a good race. He went from P19 to P12, but no points again after another bad quali. So let's just have a chat about what all this means for the championship. Obviously, Da Costa has now cemented his title as the Season 6 champion, but there is still all to play for the rest of the grid. At the moment, Jean-Eric Vergne is second in the driver's title. He scored 29 points today, and Günther, who is in third, had a DNF. But Peter, what do you think we could see from the remaining 2 races? Do you think that it's likely Techeetah will carry on their strong performance and Vergne will get himself that second place, or is it still all to play for?
Well, if you exclude Antonio's insurmountable lead at the very top there, and you look through like second to all the way through, I don't know, 9th or 10th, it's still pretty meaty and pretty good, and we've got 2 more races to go, so 60 points up for grabs. I think with the drivers' championship and also the teams' championship already decided, a lot of the drivers are going to be racing for themselves with the final 2 races, and it's just going to be absolutely, everyone just driving for themselves. And we are going to this new sort of wiggly layout. Hazel, how did you describe it? This is like the 16-turn layout. You described it in a very, very comical way, which I was just laughing
it's
about.
Like the circuit's been like SpongeBob memed.
Yes, exactly. It's the SpongeBob circuit. So, we have no idea what's going to happen. So a lot of the drivers were already remarking that because it kind of goes to new tarmac and meets old tarmac, you're going to have like weird lines all over the place. They are going to wash the entire track. So it's going to be, all clean again. But it's going to have certain bits that are sort of run in, and then new bits that could be, slippery, and we don't know what's going to happen. So I think we're in for an exciting final 2 races, and we're going to probably see some interesting, shall we say, punchy racing, as Ian James would like to say.
Yes. Well, I think that's all for this episode, I'm afraid. Many thanks to Naomi and also Hazel and Peter for their time. Naomi, first of all, thank you so much for being a guest. You've been absolutely excellent, and we'd love to have you back on the podcast again in the future if you'd be liking to come back.
Oh, it'd be my pleasure. Thank you.
But before we let you go, how can people follow you, and where is best for everybody to find out about you and your work?
Yeah, sure. So I'm at Naomi Panter on Twitter. Pretty straightforward. I don't really do Instagram, I'm afraid, except for clients. And my new agency is called Navigate Partners. It's just navigate.partners is the website. And I'd also recommend checking out Spacesuit, with whom I've worked for a million years, which is spacesuitcollections.com.
Amazing. Well, guys, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. And please do also consider leaving us a review whilst you're there, as it really does help other Formula E fans discover our content. Inside Electric is an independently run website, so please consider backing us on Patreon. And in return, you'll get some exclusive benefits, including additional bonus content, including a monthly Ask Us Anything video. Ask Hazel lots of Andre Lotterer questions, by the way. Early access to each and every podcast episode we release, plus access to the Inside Electric Discord chats. We are back next Wednesday for race 5 in Berlin, the penultimate round of the 2019-20 season. And we'll be joined for that one by Mark Priestley, or F1 Elvis, as you might know him. Mark is a former F1 McLaren mechanic who's now a successful YouTuber, author, and TV broadcaster. So, you know, many strings to his bow. We're really excited to have Mark on the show, so keep your eyes peeled for that. I have been your host, Katie Fairman, and this has been the Inside Electric podcast. We'll catch you again very, very soon.